I really want to get into the lockdowns, and I want to get into both the mask mandates and the vax mandates as well. So I'm going to open the floor to you. You could respond to what I said, and you can also give your opinion on those.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, I think that when it comes to like, I never did something because the government told me to do it, and I don't think that that's really what people should be doing. I think the correct thing to do is think, why am I doing this? Why am I wearing a mask? Why am I getting a vaccine? Why am I not interacting with people as much right now? Um, are there reasons for those things? And are they good reasons? Is there a benefit to all of these things that we're doing? I think that would be the way that I hope a layperson would look at it. So that's the angle that I want to come in at. Like, if
Can I ask you an honest question? Can I ask you
Sure.
an honest question? Do you think that is actually what happened in practice
A
for
lot
the
of
most part?
people probably not, but I don't know. I don't know how most people think.
Wouldn't you say a good sign is that when the mask mandate was ended, for example, that like 90% of the people who were wearing them took them off immediately?
Oh, so I mean, yeah, that probably indicates that a lot of people were wearing them because they had to, but I still see a lot of people wearing masks today. Um, but
It's like
you know,
2% of what it was.
whatever the case may be, it's important to ask, why am I doing this? Like, what is the reason? That's what I care about. I care about the reasons behind the recommendations, the evidence behind them, that kind of thing.
Okay. Can I ask something? Because I don't want to assume your position because I don't actually know this. But were you in favor of the mandates?
So the way that I view mandates, right? I usually answer this question by talking about childhood vaccine mandates. So before the pandemic, there was a study looking at childhood vaccine mandates across the states in the United States, because not every state has the same mandates for children to attend school, right? Some people can opt out just because of a philosophical belief. Some people have to have a religious exemption. Some people have to have a medical exemption. It varies state by
That's
state.
that's that's crazy to me, by the way, especially in the USA. Most countries aren't like that, but carry on.
Okay, but it was found that if you could only have a medical exemption, then vaccination rates were highest in those states, and those states were least likely to experience outbreaks of things like measles. In that situation, I think that makes sense. Cool. So let's go with the policies that bring us higher vaccination rates so we can prevent
Do you
more measles
do you
outbreaks.
do you not care about the civil liberties aspect here, or do you just think that the benefits trump that?
Well, I think that someone's belief that a vaccine is bad should not influence the community. And when it comes to public
What
health,
exactly
it's
what
not.
what
When it,
exactly does that mean?
so if someone chooses, if a pocket of people choose to not get vaccinated and they bring an infectious disease into a community, then that can put other people in the community at risk.
But if those other people have been vaccinated, why are they at risk?
So not everybody can get vaccinated, and not everybody is going to be protected by the vaccine. Vaccines are not 100% effective, right? So nothing's 100% effective. So if those people are bringing infectious disease into the community and adding, putting their friends, their families at risk, why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense. So
This is
when it
this
comes to
is assuming, but
like
this is
that infringes
assuming
on my
that.
liberties at that point.
But this is where I think this sounds very nebulous to me.
How so?
Because, well, firstly, I think there's a conflation that goes on with someone being unvaccinated and someone having an illness. This is something that happened a lot again during the pandemic, right? It was the words unvaccinated and sick were almost somewhat interchangeably used by a lot of people in the pro-vaccine crowd. It was like assumed that, oh, well, if that person's unvaccinated, I mean, again, the logic didn't follow,
Yeah.
right?
So
The
I mean,
thing,
I,
in terms of many of the mandates, it wasn't like okay, if you are sick, you cannot do X, or if you test positive, you cannot do X. It was like, if you are unvaccinated, you can't do X.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I
that's
mean,
not logical.
yeah, it's not like unvaccinated people are lepers.
Yeah, well,
It's not
we were treated as such.
it's not well, I mean, it was those policies were in place at a time when a lot of people were dying of COVID. A lot of people were getting hospitalized. Hospitals were getting stressed. And because the hospital systems were getting so stressed, other people were dying who of unrelated, like non-COVID causes. I mean, there
Yeah,
are
but
like
again, this comes back to the the singling out of unvaccinated people, right? You could make the argument that, hey, like, smokers are putting stress on the hospitals, obese people are putting stress on the hospitals, all these other people, but it was just like, nope, it was just this targeting of people who chose not to take this particular set of injections.
sure, but when you can do something right now that puts you at a much better chance of not having a severe outcome of an infectious disease and also reduces your risk of spreading that infectious disease. I know you probably disagree with that, but we can talk about that if you like. At a time when hospitals are so stressed and spread is so high, then it becomes a public health issue. And I totally, you know, I think that smokers and people who live unhealthy lifestyles, sure, they can put stress on the hospital systems, but we also do have uh, recommendations in place for those people to not do that. Doctors advise don't smoke. Doctors advise, try to stay healthy. And also those things are
But
not infectious.
but if someone suggested that, obese people should be denied health care, or they shouldn't be allowed access to certain facilities, or as some countries did, they shouldn't even be allowed outside, I think people would very obviously see what's wrong with that. I think people would consider that a gross violation of human rights. So this comes back to my point of
Well,
why I'm so opposed to these mandates. I do not think it was remotely justified.
well, again, it comes back to this being an infectious disease, whereas
But you
obesity,
could, but you can still spread it if you get the shot.
you're at a reduced
People,
risk of
like,
spreading it,
who cares? You can still spread it.
but you're at a
Like,
reduced.
so yeah, you can be at a reduced risk, but the idea that that means
That's another
you
reason
should be
to.
mandated to take it.
It's another reason to want as many people as possible to take it. Not only are you going to reduce the load of people suffering in the hospital and dying because of that disease, but you're also going to reduce the chances that those people who are vaccinated are going to pass it on when they do get infected, because that's the
Okay.
point of every vaccine. Every vaccine is the main goal is to prevent severe disease and death. And if it prevents transmission, that's a bonus. But that is largely due
Is
to the
that
pathogen itself. It's not really that doesn't have to do with the vaccine. But we can talk
I
about that
feel
if you
like
want.
I feel like that narrative on vaccines has changed with this most recent pandemic. Throughout my lifetime, most of the time, people talked about vaccines to prevent transmission
Ah,
and
so
to
so that so
prevent
this is a
infection.
really this is a really big misunderstanding that a lot of people have. Um,
Okay, go ahead.
and and again, it comes down to the news. It comes down to this, the fact that there are so many topics, there's so much information in the world out there and so many topics, you cannot be an expert on everything. But experts in almost every topic are going to feel like their topic is misrepresented by non-experts, right? Because and that makes sense. They know it better than anyone else. So when it comes to the scientific literature, when it comes to how vaccines have been written about in textbooks and in papers for decades, it's always been preventing severe disease, not that you're not going to get infected, because no vaccine is capable of preventing infection, right? And this comes down to like a cellular level, right? Like an infection is when the pathogen gets inside you and it gets into your cells. That's going to happen whether or not you're vaccinated, whether or not you're healthy. What's important is what happens next. There's also the factor of how much of the pathogen gets in. But if we're talking about just health here and medicine, then what happens next is going to depend on like whether or not you're vaccinated, how fast your immune system can kick into gear and control the infection, right? So like with measles or with polio is a good example. With polio, you get vaccinated, you can still get infected. Polio enters your body through your digestive system. It infects those cells. And the way you get paralytic polio is when it migrates to your central nervous system and then causes paralysis. That takes several days. Your immune system can kick into gear and control the infection before it gets to that point. That's why vaccination is effective at eliminating polio, the disease, but we still have polio, the virus, pretty much everywhere. The first time the CDC looked, and this is another criticism that I would make of the CDC, they don't look for polio in the sewage system. That's where you would find it if people are infected with it and they're shedding it into the environment. They don't look for it. But when they did a few years ago, when there was a case in Rockland County, New York, they found polio in the sewer system. Same with London. London looked in their sewer system, they find polio. Polio's there. It's just not making people sick because they're getting vaccinated. So vaccines always have been a tool to prevent severe disease and death. And preventing transmission is a bonus, but it has to be, in order to prevent transmission, your immune system has to get into gear before you become infectious. And that's going to vary from pathogen to pathogen. Vaccines are really good at preventing spread of measles because you're typically not infectious until you get your rash. And that's like on the order of 10 to 12 days after infection. But with something like influenza or SARS-CoV-2, you can be infectious within a couple of days. And so vaccines can kick into gear in time to reduce your period of shedding virus or reduce your total viral load. But it's not going to be as effective at stopping transmission as some other vaccines. But it does reduce it. So
how much does it reduce it by? How much does it reduce transmission by?
I can get you a paper that looked at the numbers, but it significantly reduces your viral load and it reduces your window of infectious shedding by on the order of days. So
okay. So here's another one where so-called conspiracy theorists question big pharma, question bureaucrats, question policies. Why was naturally acquired immunity ignored? Why was the shot pushed on people who had already had COVID and fully recovered from it and even had tested positive for antibodies? What was going on there?
Because it was shown that having a shot on top of your natural immunity, which some people like to call it infection granted immunity or something along those lines, but we'll call it natural immunity. Having one vaccine dose on top of that really improved your immunity. So in the literature,
where do you get? Can I do want to ask? Okay, sorry. Answer this question, and then I've got a more general question I want to ask.
Oh, okay, sure. So natural immunity was not ignored in the scientific literature. In 2021, we knew this as early as like mid 2021 that if you are infected and you get just one dose of vaccine on top of your infection, then your immunity looks better than if you had 2 doses of vaccine. It looks more like what we recognize now as having 3 doses of vaccine, right? And the way we look at that is we look at how broad your antibodies' abilities are to attack and neutralize virus. So that means like, are your antibodies able to neutralize Delta and Omicron and all these other variants? That's what we mean by broad antibody immunity. And it also broadens your T cell immunity, which is different. T cells work differently than antibodies, and they are a lot less prone to being evaded by variants. T cells are harder to fool than antibodies are. So it was known from 2021 on that getting one dose of vaccine really improved and broadened your immunity, which again goes back to, if it's better, if it makes you safer, then why not do it? And so now, now the CDC recommendations are that everybody, regardless of previous vaccination status or infection status, the recommendation moving forward is just to get one dose of mRNA vaccine, because they assume that most people have been infected by now or gotten vaccinated by now, and one dose of updated mRNA vaccine, according to literature that we knew in 2021, is going to give you substantially broad immunity and give you really good protection relative to not getting it.
Okay, I've got two follow-up questions on this, man. Like, I know with time we'll probably need to do a follow-up on this at some point.
Sure.
But so it's interesting, you know, hearing all of this, because my brain keeps going to, even if, you know, I have questions about various things, right? But even if everything that you're saying were correct and true,
Mhm.
let's say we're talking about someone who is 25 years old, and they're already, their original risk of, if they get COVID, you know, their chance of death, let's say, is 0.002. And let's say they've already had an infection, they've already got, and I mean, we're, it's like the risk is already so low in certain cohorts that reducing the risk even further, like even if someone could convince me that, you know, I could reduce my risk from 0.005 to 0.003, you know, it's, to me, it's just, it gets a bit asinine, right? I'm not talking about elderly people, but I'm talking about the younger cohorts and demographics. I'm just like, what is even going on here? Especially when you consider, again, especially if you're talking about mandates and you're talking about the infringement of liberties, especially if you're talking about lockdowns, you're talking about masks, you're talking about all of these other things which have consequences for people. These have social consequences, they have economic consequences, they have mental well-being consequences, they have a lot of consequences. So to do all of this, like if we were talking about, okay, look, there's this virus, and hey, if you get it, there's like a 20% chance it's going to kill you. And here's something we can do to reduce it from 20 to 1. Here's something we can do to reduce it from 20 to, you know, even down to 5. Like, to me, that's, again, I'd still be anti-mandate, and I don't think a mandate would be necessary, because I think if you gave people information, they would, you know, do what makes sense. But for a lot of people, I know I can say this confidently, for a huge amount of people, it's simply that the risk is already so low, and always has been, that reducing the risk even further, while potentially, especially at the time when, you know, all of this was rolling out, and a lot of these, you know, long-term consequences are not known, how effective it is not known, how long it's going to last is not known, right? They started rolling out the boosters and all that. A lot of people are just like, you know what, like the math doesn't make sense for me. And by the way, this is one of the main reasons why, again, I myself, in my personal life and even publicly, I never told anyone what to do. I didn't tell anyone, hey, like, go get the shot, go get, like, one person here is a 15-year-old who's perfectly healthy. Someone else is a 75-year-old who's got, you know, multiple health issues and so on. Like, the math is not the same. The math isn't the same for myself and, you know, for, you know, a grandparent or an old uncle or something. And again, this comes back to why it's just like, it should be a personal choice, especially when you get into the fact that, I know that vax side effects might be, you know, again, depending on who you talk to, some people think side effects are extremely rare. Some people think side effects are pretty common and very severe. But regardless, there is another risk that's being introduced from that. I do personally know people. I do personally know two young men who did have myocarditis post shot. Like, you know, they both actually, more than that, they both had heart attacks. Like, I do know that definitely happened. And I know that, you know, sometimes people don't want to talk about that because people have their different sides, right? You'll have people who don't want to admit that some people have had a nasty time with the virus, and you have other people who don't want to admit that some people have had a nasty time with the shot. And it's just like, look, it's all true. There's all sorts of different risk analyses out there. And that's why I think ultimately, it should and always should have been left up to the individual, and I'd even say familial choice, right? I don't know everyone's different situation. I don't know who's been infected and who hasn't. I don't know what comorbidities people have or what they don't. I don't know how old everyone is and their entire medical history. And I'm not interested to know either. But I think, like with most other things, like with flu shots, I think it should just be like, hey, it's here's the information, here's the availability, and it's up to you. Here's who we recommend it for in particular. Um, and here are the numbers. And I think, again, I think in a free society, that's to me, it's like that's obviously how it should be done.